it's like all the pores for the hair to come up, all of that is gone. But they shave the hair from off their foreheads. God's restriction on cutting the hair was based on the Canaanite practice of making an offering of hair to gain the favor of the spirits of the dead. Because there were some cultures where people were afraid of the dead. They were afraid that the spirits of the dead will come back to do them harm and to hurt them and to do them injury. And so to appease the god, they removed the hair from the forehead. In some instances, they would even shave the hair from off the eyebrow, and then they would offer the hair as a sacrifice. It was the custom among the idolatrous nations that Israel intermingled with to present the hair they cut off as a sacrifice to the deities. You see, the thing with Satan, he always comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And the Lord has given us our hair for our glory. A woman's hair is her glory. The Bible says that. It's your glory, it's your dignity. And so here God has crowned women, saved and unsaved, with glory. And Satan knows that. And so now he comes and he says, if you are going to worship me, you've got to destroy your glory. And that is what we do when we cut our hair in these demonic hairstyles. We are destroying our glory, and the devil is just laughing. Because it doesn't matter how cute you look or how younger you think less hair make you look. You are destroying the glory that God has given to you, and that is what the devil was after. Hair was also used in divination among the Asians and for purposes of religious superstitions among the Greeks. So just like the Bible talks about the king of Babylon is coming and he's looking through the entrails of the animals, they would take the guts of the animals and they would read by divination based on how the guts of the animal looked or form when it came out, what they were trying to hear from the gods. And so here's people taking hair and using it as divination. It was also customary for parents to dedicate the hair of their children to their God. And when they came to manhood, they would cut off the hair and consecrate it to the deity. And so all of this is going on. Remember, it's in the books, the 5 Old Testament books called the pt2, that the Lord is speaking into this thing, because the Canaanites and the Egyptians and the Persians and the Hittites and the Amalekites and the Ammonites are doing all this stuff in worship to their gods. And God is saying to his people, I give you here for glory and dignity. I don't want you to be shaving off your hair. I don't want you to be removing all of your eyebrows. I know we arch our brows and stuff like that. I'm talking about completely cutting off the eyebrows, completely removing the hair from the side. Some people bring it down to scalp. Even if you don't bring it down to scalp, but you shave it and it carries the same illusion, you are doing exactly what the heathens do in worship of the devil. Dreadlocks. Dreadlocks draw a spirit of confusion and spiritual deception to the wearer. Dreadlocks, we know, is associated with Rastafarianism, but dreadlocks draws a spirit of confusion. And then there's the whole thing of dyeing your hair in 3 to 5 colors at the same time. A spirit of confusion and a lack of identity. Green and blue and purple. These are all the things that the enemy is doing to destroy the image of God in the believer. If the world do it, Jesus has already said they are of their father, the devil. But when you are a child of God, there's nothing wrong with having a hair color. You know, you tint certain parts of your hair, but when you have to have pink to the left and green to the right and blue to the top and yellow to the back, that is a person who's confused, who lacks, you know, any spiritual direction. Peter talks now, too, about women adorning themselves, the text that was read. He says, do not let your adornment be the outward adornment of arranging hair, of wearing gold and stuff like that. Peter also is saying to the women, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as braided hair and the wearing of gold jewelry and fine clothes. So he himself is dealing with a problem. So like Paul, Peter puts the emphasis not on arranging hair with jewelry, but he's talking about having Christian character, the fruit of the Spirit. They're talking about the same thing. And notice Peter now is writing to Christians that are scattered abroad, to the 12 tribes that are scattered abroad. So now the church that is all over Europe and Greek and Spain now, they're doing the same thing. And Peter is saying, listen, your emphasis must be on Christian character, the fruit of the Spirit, meekness and humility. So, and he's talking about believers having a calm temper, a contented mind, a heart free from passion, pride, envy, and irritability. Someone who seeks to be distinguished from the prideful and carnal excessiveness of external adorning. Peter is also saying that these qualities are not only a great price in the sight of God, but that they will secure the affection of one's husband and win him to embrace true religion. So he's saying to women who think, man, I can do my hair like this, and when my husband see me, you know, he's going to want to hold on to me, and he's going to love me, whatever. He's saying, you can look as good as you want to, but if on the inside you're a miserable, discontented wife, you have no Christian character or virtue, he's saying your pretty clothes and your extravagant hairstyle is not going to cause your husband to see the beauty of Jesus Christ in you. He's saying by a meek and quiet spirit, by the way how you conduct yourself as a wife in the house of God, you're contented. Honey, my car needs changing. Babes, I can't do it for the next 2 years. Well, I don't know why I marry you for, because you promised me you will do this and you will do that. Okay, honey, let's touch and agree that God will give you favor and that you will get an increase on the job. He's saying your husband, there's every possibility that your husband will become converted to Christianity if your life is right, if your character is Christ-like, and not by the external adorning of looking pretty and getting your Botox and, you know, they tuck here and they tuck there, your nose fell down, and, you know, you have injections in your lips, and you go and you get breast implants and butt implants. He's saying that is not going to win your husband to Christ. But when he can see the Christ that you talk about living on the inside of you, when you're unselfish and you're tired, but you're making sure your husband is well taken care of, you keep his bed clean and his food fresh, and you make sure that people are not talking your name to his disgrace, and you're not seen sitting in the lap of another man, and you're not people who cause quarrels and confusions, and the pastor is coming to the house to chastise you because of your behavior. He's saying if you're a Christian woman, that you must stand out as one who knows Christ. And the Asians considered a meek and a quiet spirit a prime virtue for godly women. So if you said that you were a woman of God and you weren't humble, and you didn't have a quiet spirit, you were peaceable, you were not one who starts strife and confusion, then you didn't have a testimony. So in going through these two texts and what I have said, I want to say that the Bible is not saying that a woman should only have natural hair. It doesn't say that. That is your choice if you want to have natural hair. Should she leave her hair unattended or unbraided? No. When the Bible talks about, you know, not with braided hair, it's not saying that it should look like a doormat. You know, you just don't do nothing with it. You wash it and you just leave it as is. You don't pass a comb through it. It is not speaking about that at all. As I said, they're dealing with spiritual problems. The emphasis on adornment more than spiritual sanctification. Should your hair only be naturally braided or plaited? It is not saying that either. Are relaxers and perms and braids with extensions and weaves and hair pieces and wigs prohibited? No. No, it is not prohibited. Is coloring your hair unscriptural? No. Should Christians avoid trendy hairstyles? Yes or no. If it's demonic, no. If it is suitable, yes. Is cutting your hair unbiblical? No. The Bible tells us about Absalom cutting his hair from time to time. Is wearing jewelry in your hair a sin? No. Because the Bible was never addressing the hairstyles as a problem. Per se, it was addressing not putting yourself in a place where you grow spiritually, but you become more carnal than you are spiritual. And so the apostles were asking for shift. Put the greatest emphasis that you have on the natural, on the spiritual, and then you would look really beautiful when you adorn yourself. I have about 5 minutes. Are there any questions? Any questions at all from anyone? Was I that good? Okay, there's a question. Of course, there were combs back then. In the Bible, when we come across the scripture where it talks about Absalom had locks. Do you see the Jews with that one lock? That is the lock it is talking about, not the dreadlock. And so not that they didn't cut their hair or that they didn't, attend to their beards. They just were not to do it in the way the idolaters did it. That was the distinction that the Lord was dealing with. So the locks is not a dreadlocks. That's what the rasters do. They go to the word locks and they take it to mean that, but that's not what he's talking about. Any other question? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. She would come under the responsibility of any other family member that is alive. You see how Mordecai raised Esther because her parents were dead? A male figure. Well, whoever would be the matriarch, because there's always somebody in a clan or lineage that is of age and of spiritual authority that would cover you and even arrange your marriage, that kind of stuff. Because remember when Caleb didn't have any sons and daughters were not allowed an inheritance, but they approached their father, and then the Lord sanctioned and says, if a man doesn't have sons, then the daughters will get his inheritance, but it had to stay within the clan and within the tribe. Even though they're married, it couldn't go over to the tribe that they're married into. Any other questions? Do you believe that the hat is the covering? Anyone still believe that the hat is the covering? I'm not here to bully or press you to change your mind. I'm just here to tell you the truth. Do you still believe that the hat is the covering? Anybody does? Let me see the hands of those who don't believe the hat is a covering. Just raise your hands. You sure? 27. Because the style originates from the kingdom of darkness. It is a style that Satan introduced in worship of him. And so the thing with the Old Testament and us New Testament believers, the only part of the law that we are not, or the commands that God give, that we are not bound to is the ritualistic part of it pertaining to the worship, the blood sacrifice. And if a woman is in her menstrual cycle, she becomes unclean. So you can't go to work, you can't sleep with your husband, your whole house become unclean, the bed you're lying down on become unclean. You have to do this ritualistic bath that Bathsheba was doing on her roof. If mildew is in the house, you know, the house is condemned for 7 days, and then the priest has to come. There's certain things like the red heifer. The cleansing of the red heifer was for purposes. If you touch a dead body as a pastor, you're unclean. So Aaron couldn't go to his son's funeral. Now as a pastor, you can go to a funeral. People kiss the dead, touch the dead. There's certain things on the Old Testament law, because God did that because of the cultures of the people around his people. And so there were things he put in place to protect them, to keep them holy, to keep them sanctified, and to keep them focused on him. Now, even in the giving of the animals, they were clean and unclean. If the hoof is divided, but the cut is this, so you can eat pig. I eat pig, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven. Because Paul comes back in the New Testament and says, in the beginning, everything was clean. It was not that the animal was literally unclean or diseased, but it was a prohibition that God put in place for his people. And now that aspect, certain aspects of it is no longer enforced but to us Gentiles. But there's still things that God give in the command that is still applicable to us today. The 10 Commandments says, thou shalt not commit adultery. We still can't commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not covet. Now in the 10 Commandments, it talks about the seventh day Sabbath. But we realize that with the resurrection of Jesus Christ, it was the early church who then made the decision that the first day of the week on which Jesus Christ arose from the dead would be the day that the church would gather for worship of the Lord. And then they used the Sabbath for evangelism and distribution of food to the poor, because Jesus made it known by his ministry that the I normally get it mixed up. Is it man was made for the Sabbath? The day doesn't tell you what you can and cannot do. And so Jesus made it known that you can do good on the Sabbath. That kind of thing. So those hairstyles are the ones that Satan implements, like heavy metal and rock music. There's certain genres of music that literally come out of the pit of hell. So we don't seek to play them in church, because you realize that people who listen to those genres, they do drugs and alcohol, and they're sexually promiscuous, and they're mentally unstable. And so when something comes out of the kingdom of darkness, you don't ever want to do it, period. Mm-hmm. 2 more questions before I go, because it's lunchtime. Is the food ready? Mm-hmm. 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 No. 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 Amen. Amen. I want to emphasize this before I go. Remember that Paul was speaking into a cultural setting in the text. 1 Corinthians 11, 5 and 6. He was speaking into a cultural setting at Corinth pertaining to the covering of the head. He did the same thing at Ephesus. The reason why there's so much confusion within Christendom is that sometimes some leaders don't study. And the older folks who believed this thing, all they had was the King James Version of the Bible. And they wanted to do right by God. But now you can go online and you can search, and there's so many study tools. You have to be careful who you listen to online, because everybody is not for the cause of Christ. So he was speaking into a cultural setting. However, if you're a member of a church that demand a hat, you should wear it. There's some churches I go to, and they say it must be covered. I always make sure. Let me show it to you. Because the Bible says, don't let your strength cause somebody to be weak. So I always make sure I have my chapel cap. Some people call it my mantilla. And I have the two clips. If they want it, all I have to do is just put it on and preach. Amen. Because if my preaching without it is going to cause them not to receive the word, it's a waste of time. Amen. We are here to help, and we are here to bless. Amen. And so that's the first part, the spiritual part. The next part, to help you get some good, long, thick, bouncy hair, is coming after lunch.